A dual relationship is pretty much like it sounds when you have dual or more than one relationship. Essentially, anytime you're filling two or more different social roles, that would be a dual relationship. In counseling, one of those roles would be being the counselor, and then the other role could be literally any other relationship you have with that person, any other way you know them. For example, I think a lot of us could be transitioning to fields soon, and maybe in smaller areas where it's quite likely that we could potentially be counseling someone who used to be one of our colleagues in our previous field. That would be an example of a dual relationship, because you have that colleague relationship, that previous work relationship, and then the counseling relationship. Kind of back and forth, whether or not it's a bad thing. It definitely could be both. I really liked how our textbook, Remley and Hirley 2020, sort of went through some of the unavoidable situations and specifically mentioned rural areas. Growing up in a rural area, when I was younger, I was in counseling end of my freshman year and most of my sophomore year of high school. And the woman I was seeing, which was great, she was a really great fit for me. Counseling was definitely super successful. But the counselor I was working with was actually one of my mom's coworkers. My mom was a teacher. She was an aide at the time at our alternative center, which was sort of like kids who had been kicked out of their homeschool, either permanently or temporarily, like in an alternative to out of school suspension type of thing. So she would work, my mom would work with those kids, just helping the ones who qualify for special ed services like read aloud, stuff like that, helping them do better in their coursework. And the woman who was counseling me was a staff at that school, so knew my mom professionally. She didn't really know me from Adam, but there's still that little bit of a dual relationship because she was working with my mom and knew me in that way. That would be an example one that, at least for our therapeutic relationship, I don't think the dual relationship had any effect on it, other than it may have actually been positive, because this is someone that I know my mom sought out to specifically work with me. To mitigate a dual relationship, first you should explore the relationship personally and ask yourself, is this an issue or not? I think the main advice we've been given is just to avoid them if at all possible. The 2014 ACA Code of Ethics A.6.A has a pretty nice little list of ways to sort of work through the relationship, including mentioning it in your informed consent, maybe rewriting a new informed consent to reflect the dual relationship, consultation, supervision, working with a peer, bringing it into supervision, and documenting everything. Over documentation is probably going to be the better advice there, just to ensure that the judgment of you as the counselor is not being impaired and there's no exploitation, because there is this like really power shifted relationship where the counselor has a lot more of the power than the client. And if you're carrying that over to any kind of other relationship, that it can get weird, right? It can end up doing some damage because of the slant. And it can also lead to an inability to be objective on the behalf of the counselor, which could lead to not great treatment and therapeutic decisions. And also our textbook mentions with the harm that the dual relationship could make it harder to make decisions because you don't have that professional mask to hide behind, especially somebody that you knew prior to working with them in counseling. You've already got sort of this norm for your relationship, and then going outside of that can be challenging, and not just in a way that the power is getting slanted in a relationship, and not just in the way that it could impair your judgment or the client's judgment, but even just a way that it could be just uncomfortable and different because you don't really have that professional relationship the same way you would with someone who's a complete stranger to you outside of counseling. There's a study in 2018 by Woodward and Grimes that also mentioned that many times a dual relationship can be unavoidable, and in some circumstances culturally insensitive to try and avoid one. Either way, their advice was sort of to treat it the way we've been trained to deal with transference and countertransference. Explore it from its onset to as long as the relationship exists. Communicate congruently, be really open with each other. Create a contract, sort of like what the ACA Code of Ethics were saying with the informed consent, specifically mentioning the dual relationship and how it may or may not complicate things. Address issues as they arise, be open to revisiting, like, hey, I know we said we were good, maybe we're not, and being ready, again, to consult with a peer or bring it into supervision. Thanks for watching. What do you guys think?